Maya Richardson's fingers drummed lightly on her Toyota Camry steering wheel as she hummed along to Ella Fitzgerald's "What a Wonderful World." The early morning sun painted Atlanta's Garden District in shades of gold, and the spring air flowing through her partially opened window carried the sweet scent of blooming magnolias. Her morning had started at 4 a.m., driving 2 hours outside the city to meet elderly Mr. Chen, whose hidden forest farm produced the most exquisite mushrooms she'd ever encountered. The trunk of her car held precious cargo, carefully packed boxes of rare chanterelles and morels, along with heritage vegetables from Mr. Chen's garden. These ingredients would transform into something magical at tonight's private dinner event, where she planned to showcase a new menu that honored her grandmother's traditional recipes while pushing the boundaries of modern cuisine. Maya checked her watch. 7:45 a.m. She had plenty of time to get the ingredients to her sous chef before heading to a quick meeting with her restaurant's investors. Her simple cotton blouse and tailored pants were perfectly appropriate for both kitchen prep and business discussions, an intentional choice that reflected her practical nature. As she turned onto Maple Avenue, Maya's mind wandered to the evening ahead. She visualized the plating of her signature dish, a reinvention of her grandmother's Sunday supper featuring those beautiful mushrooms. The recipe had earned her first James Beard nomination, though most people wouldn't guess that the quiet woman driving this modest sedan had revolutionized Southern fine dining. The peaceful morning shattered as red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror. Maya's heart skipped a beat, but she remained calm, remembering her father's careful instructions from years ago. She signaled and pulled over smoothly, positioning her car well off the road. Her hands moved to the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel as she watched the police cruiser stop behind her. Through her mirror, Maya observed a young officer approaching, his hand resting casually on his belt. She rolled down her window completely, turned off the music, and waited patiently. The scent of magnolias was replaced by the sharp smell of morning asphalt. "License and registration," the officer stated flatly, his flashlight beam sweeping across her interior even though daylight filled the car. "Of course, officer," Maya replied politely, moving slowly as she reached for her glove compartment. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" "You rolled through the stop sign back at Oakwood intersection," he replied, taking her documents. "This is a residential area, ma'am. We take traffic violations very seriously here." Maya's brow furrowed slightly. She clearly remembered making a full stop, watching a jogger pass before proceeding. She'd even admired the newly planted flower beds at that corner. But she kept her voice steady as she responded, "I understand the importance of traffic safety, officer. However, I'm certain I came to a complete stop." The officer's expression remained impassive as he studied her license. "Please wait here," he instructed, turning back toward his cruiser. Maya watched in her side mirror as he ran her information. The morning sun continued to rise, and somewhere nearby, a lawn sprinkler activated with its familiar tick-tick-tick rhythm. She glanced at her watch again, 7:52 a.m. The private dinner was hours away, but her carefully planned schedule was beginning to fray at the edges. Still, she took a deep breath and maintained her composure, her grandmother's words echoing in her mind. "Grace under pressure is a recipe for respect." 2 weeks later, Maya stepped through the heavy wooden doors of the Atlanta Municipal Court, her olive green blazer offering little protection against the aggressive air conditioning. The marble floors echoed with the click of her sensible heels as she joined the growing crowd of people waiting for traffic court to begin. Her small leather notebook, filled with recipe ideas and ingredient lists, provided a comforting weight in her hand. The courthouse lobby hummed with nervous energy. People shifted in the uncomfortable wooden benches, thumbed through dog-eared magazines, or stared at their phones. Maya found a spot near the back, pulled out her notebook, and began sketching a new plating design for her autumn menu. A young mother struggled to quiet her fussy toddler in the row ahead, and Maya discreetly passed forward a small package of crackers from her bag. The grateful smile she received warmed the chilly room. At precisely 9:00 a.m., a court officer emerged. "All rise for the Honorable Judge William Blackwood," his voice carried across the now silent room. The judge swept in, his black robes rustling as he took his position behind the bench. His steel-gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him an appearance of stern authority, and his reputation for running an efficient courtroom was evident in his brisk movements. Maya observed as case after case moved swiftly through the system. Judge Blackwood handled each one with mechanical precision, rarely looking up from his papers as he issued fines and dismissals. She noticed how some people fumbled through their explanations, while others spoke with practiced ease. Her own case number would be called soon, and she reviewed her prepared statement in her mind. The notebook in her lap now held more than recipe notes. She had drawn a detailed diagram of the Oakwood intersection, complete with timestamps and the path of the morning jogger who had crossed before her. Years of precision in the kitchen had taught her the value of thorough documentation. She had even noted the newly planted purple petunias she'd admired that morning, details that proved she had been fully aware of her surroundings. Case number 247, the clerk called out. Maya stood gracefully, smoothing her blazer as she walked forward. The same poise that carried her through bustling restaurant kitchens now guided her steps to the podium. She placed her notebook carefully on the scratched wooden surface, noting how the morning light streaming through the high windows cast dramatic shadows across the courtroom. Judge Blackwood glanced at the citation before him, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. "Ms. Richardson," he began, his tone carrying the weariness of someone who had heard every possible excuse. "You're charged with failing to come to a complete stop at a stop sign. How do you plead?" Maya squared her shoulders, channeling the confidence that had earned her 3 James Beard nominations. "Not guilty, Your Honor," she replied clearly, her voice carrying the same measured tone she used when teaching young chefs in her kitchen. She opened her notebook, ready to present her carefully prepared explanation. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she waited for permission to continue. Through the tall courthouse windows, she could see the city skyline where, 18 floors up, her team was probably starting prep for the lunch service. In just a few hours, she would need to be there to oversee the new seasonal menu launch. But for now, she stood perfectly still, her grandmother's lessons in patience serving her well once again. Maya opened her notebook with steady hands, years of precision knife work evident in her controlled movements. "Your Honor, I've prepared a detailed account of the morning in question," she began, her voice carrying the same quiet authority she used when leading her kitchen staff through a challenging service. Judge Blackwood's pen tapped against his desk in a staccato rhythm. He barely glanced up as she spoke, his attention seemingly focused on the stack of files before him. The morning light caught his wire-rimmed glasses, creating a glare that obscured his eyes. "On the morning of April 15th, I came to a complete stop at the Oakwood intersection at 7:45 am, Maya continued, turning her notebook to show her carefully drawn diagram. "I waited for a jogger in a blue tracksuit to cross before proceeding. The newly planted purple petunias in the corner garden beds were in full bloom, and I distinctly remember admiring them while waiting." The judge's pen stopped its tapping. "Ms. Richardson, are you suggesting the officer was incorrect in his assessment?" His tone carried a hint of impatience, the kind Maya recognized from customers who decided their meal was unsatisfactory before taking the first bite. "No, Your Honor. I'm simply presenting my recollection of events," Maya responded, maintaining her composure like she would during a difficult restaurant review. "I have great respect for law enforcement and traffic safety. As someone who manages a team of 50 people, I understand the importance of rules and—" "Ms. Richardson," Judge Blackwood interrupted, removing his glasses and finally looking directly at her. "This court sees dozens of traffic violations daily. Everyone has a story. Everyone was paying attention. Everyone made a complete stop." His words carried the weight of routine dismissal. The courtroom air felt thicker now, the fluorescent lights humming overhead like the sound of kitchen hood vents during a busy service. Maya remained steady, her posture perfect, the same way she'd stood during countless culinary competitions where judges had underestimated her. "Your Honor, I've brought supporting documentation." She tried once more, gesturing to her notebook, where she'd recorded every detail of that morning with the same precision she used for developing recipes. "That won't be necessary," Judge Blackwood cut in, already reaching for his gavel. "This court finds you in violation of Traffic Code 40-672. Given the residential nature of the area and the importance of maintaining safety in our community, you are hereby fined $500. Pay the clerk on your way out." The fine was notably higher than those issued to previous cases that morning. Maya heard a few murmurs from the gallery behind her, but she kept her focus forward, her expression neutral. She'd learned long ago in high-pressure kitchens that reactions only gave others power over your peace. "Thank you, Your Honor," she replied with the same grace she used when accepting both compliments and complaints in her restaurant. She gathered her notebook and turned to leave, her movements measured and dignified. As she walked toward the clerk's desk, Maya's mind was already shifting to her afternoon prep list. She had a new seasonal menu to launch, 3 VIP reservations to oversee, and a group of culinary students arriving for their mentorship program. This courtroom was just another test of patience, like waiting for a souffle to rise or a sauce to reduce. The clerk processed her payment with mechanical efficiency, and Maya tucked the receipt into her notebook alongside her intersection diagram and the day's prep lists. Outside the courthouse, the spring sun had warmed the morning air, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine from the nearby garden. She checked her watch. Still enough time to stop by the restaurant's rooftop garden before the lunch service began. Judge William Blackwood loosened his tie as he stepped through his front door, the weight of the day's cases falling from his shoulders. The familiar scent of his wife's perfume mixed with something unexpected. She was dressed for an evening out, elegant in a midnight blue dress he hadn't seen before. "Happy anniversary, darling." Sarah Blackwood smiled, her silver hair styled perfectly. "I hope you're ready for a surprise." She handed him a small envelope, watching expectantly as he opened it. Inside was a reservation card for the Garden Table, Atlanta's most talked-about new restaurant. William's eyes widened. "Sarah, how did you?" They're booked months in advance. He'd been trying to secure a reservation himself, quietly making calls during lunch breaks, but even his position as a judge hadn't opened any doors. "Remember Claire from my book club? Her daughter works in restaurant publicity. She pulled some strings." Sarah's eyes sparkled with satisfaction. "You have exactly 45 minutes to shower and change. Our reservation is at 7:30. William hurried upstairs, his earlier fatigue forgotten. He'd read every review of the Garden Table, followed the buzz about its innovative take on Southern cuisine. The restaurant had earned unprecedented praise from critics nationwide, with whispers of Michelin scouts being spotted in Atlanta specifically to visit this establishment. As he knotted his best silk tie, William recalled snippets from the reviews. "A revolutionary approach to heritage recipes. Elevates comfort food to high art. Each dish tells a story of tradition transformed." His own family had deep Southern roots, and he prided himself on his knowledge of fine cuisine. This evening promised to be memorable. The drive downtown was filled with anticipation. Sarah shared tidbits she gathered about the restaurant. The rooftop garden where they grew rare herbs, the custom-made pottery from local artisans, the carefully curated wine cellar. The setting sun painted the Atlanta skyline in shades of amber and rose as they pulled up to the valet stand. The Garden Table occupied a restored 1920s building, its brick facade softened by cascading vines and subtle lighting. Inside, the space balanced rustic warmth with modern elegance, exposed brick walls, gleaming copper fixtures, and tables crafted from reclaimed heart pine. The soft glow of vintage Edison bowls created intimate pools of light throughout the dining room. The maitre d' greeted them warmly, clearly briefed about the special occasion. "Judge and Mrs. Blackwood, welcome to the Garden Table. We're honored to have you with us this evening." He led them to a prime corner table, where hand-blown glass votives cast dancing shadows on the crisp white tablecloth. Their server Jessica, approached with the quiet confidence of someone who knew she was part of something exceptional. "Good evening. We've prepared a special tasting menu for your anniversary celebration. Would you like to begin with a glass of our house-made sparkling elderflower aperitif?" William nodded approvingly at the suggestion, already impressed by the attention to detail. The elderflower aperitif arrived in crystal coupes, garnished with tiny edible flowers that Sarah immediately recognized from her own garden. "Mountain violets," she exclaimed delightedly. "I didn't know they were edible." As they sipped their drinks, William studied the dining room with a critic's eye. Everything spoke of careful curation. The playlist of soft jazz classics, the subtle aroma of herbs and butter wafting from the kitchen, the perfectly spaced tables ensuring private conversation. He had presided over hundreds of cases today. But here, in this moment, he was simply a guest eager to experience culinary excellence. The third course arrived beneath silver clutches, and William Blackwood found himself leaning forward in anticipation. Jessica, their server, lifted the covers with practiced grace, releasing a fragrant cloud of herbs and truffle. "Chef's signature dish," she announced. "Heritage shrimp and grits reimagined with wild mushrooms foraged this morning." The presentation was stunning. Golden grits formed a perfect circle, topped with Gulf shrimp, and surrounded by a constellation of tiny vegetables and mushrooms. Sarah touched her husband's arm as he reached for his fork. "Darling, look at those mushrooms. They're the same ones your mother used to search for in spring." William paused, studying the plate more closely. The chanterelles were indeed identical to the ones his mother would bring home from her morning walks. The memory caught in his throat. Childhood Sunday dinners, his mother's apron dusted with flour, the warmth of family gathered around simple but perfect food. "The chef would like to greet you personally," Jessica interrupted his reverie. "She makes a point of welcoming special guests, particularly those celebrating occasions like anniversaries." Sarah straightened in her chair, delighted. "Oh, how wonderful. William's been following the restaurant story since before it opened." She smiled at her husband, knowing his passion for culinary arts almost matched his dedication to the law. The dining room's soft murmur seemed to quiet as a figure emerged from the kitchen doors. Even at a distance, there was something familiar about her measured stride, the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. As she drew closer, William's hand froze, his fork suspended above the perfect circle of grits. Maya Richardson wore pristine chef's whites, 3 James Beard medals gleaming at her lapel. Her hair was tied back neatly, and she moved through her dining room with the same grace she had shown in his courtroom that morning. Recognition crashed over him like a wave, bringing with it the memory of his dismissive tone, his impatient interruptions, the unnecessarily heavy fine. "Good evening, Judge Blackwood, Mrs. Blackwood." Maya greeted them, her voice carrying the same composed tone she had used hours earlier. "I trust you're enjoying your anniversary celebration." Sarah, unaware of the morning's events, beamed up at her. "Everything is absolutely extraordinary. These mushrooms, they remind my husband of his childhood." "Chanterelles from Mr. Chen's forest farm," Maya explained, turning to William. "I drove out at dawn to select them personally. One must come to a complete stop to truly appreciate such delicate flavors." The subtle emphasis on her words wasn't lost on William, whose face had taken on the same shade as the wine in his glass. He set down his fork, the quiet clink against fine china seeming to echo his discomfort. "The grits," he managed finally. "They're exceptional." "Family recipe," Maya replied, her smile professional, but her eyes holding his gaze steadily. "My grandmother taught me that patience and attention to detail are crucial in both cooking and life. Sometimes the most important moments require us to stop, observe, and give them the consideration they deserve." Sarah, sensing an undercurrent but unsure of its source, watched the exchange with curiosity. The judge's usual confident demeanor had vanished, replaced by something she hadn't seen in years, the look of a man confronting his own hasty judgment. Maya moved through her dining room with practiced ease, her chef's whites catching the warm glow of vintage chandeliers. At each table, She shared stories of ingredients and inspiration, transforming meals into memories. The evening symphony of gentle conversation and clinking glasses provided a perfect backdrop for her careful choreography between kitchen and dining room. Returning to the Blackwoods table, she carried a small copper pot of sauce, adding the final touch to their main course. "This reduction takes exactly 12 hours, she explained, pouring the silky liquid with the precision of an artist. Like many good things in life, it can't be rushed. Her eyes met Judge Blackwood's briefly, the message clear but never crossing the line into disrespect. Sarah Blackwood leaned forward, captivated by Maya's presence. "Chef Richardson, I read that you learned cooking from your grandmother. Would you tell us about her influence on your cuisine?" Maya's smile softened with genuine warmth. "My grandmother taught me that every dish has a story, and every story deserves to be heard." She adjusted the plate's alignment ever so slightly. She believed in taking time with important things, whether it was simmering a stock, listening to a friend, or making a decision that could affect someone's life. The judge shifted in his seat, his collar suddenly feeling too tight. But Maya continued with professional poise, describing how her grandmother's Sunday suppers had evolved into the sophisticated dishes before them. She spoke of tradition and innovation, of respect for the past, while embracing change. "Each evening, we serve about 200 guests," Maya shared, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had earned every accolade pinned to her chef's coat. "Every single one receives the same attention to detail, the same careful consideration. In my kitchen, we believe that rushing to judgment about any dish or any person does a disservice to both the food and our craft." A young line cook appeared at Maya's side, whispering something urgent about the evening special. She excused herself gracefully, but not before completing her thought. "The true measure of any establishment, whether it's a restaurant or a courtroom, lies in how it treats every individual who walks through its doors." As she moved away, her workspace called her back, like a compass finding north. In the kitchen's steel-clad domain, she checked temperatures, adjusted seasonings, and guided her team with the same measured confidence she'd shown in the dining room. Through the service window, she could see Judge Blackwood staring at his plate, fork untouched, his wife's concerned glance crossing the table like a question mark. The evening continued its careful dance. Maya orchestrated perfect plates and genuine moments, her performance never revealing the morning's injustice. When she visited other tables, her laughter rang authentic, her passion for food evident in every gesture and explanation. She shared stories of hunting mushrooms in morning mist, of learning to make perfect grits at her grandmother's elbow, of the joy in creating something that brought people together. In the soft glow of the dining room, Maya was more than the woman who had stood before the judge's bench. She was a master of her craft, a keeper of traditions, a creator of experiences. Her kitchen ran with the precision of a courthouse, but with a warmth that transformed justice into grace, judgment into understanding. The clock on Judge Blackwood's bedside table glowed 2:17 a.m., its red digits seeming to mock his restlessness. The exquisite dinner at the garden table sat heavily in his stomach, though Sarah had declared it the best meal of her life, before drifting off to peaceful sleep beside him. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, and made his way to his home office. Moonlight filtered through the window as he settled into his leather chair, the same one where he reviewed cases each evening. Tonight, instead of tomorrow's docket, he pulled out the morning's traffic court records. His own signature looked foreign to him now, especially on Maya Richardson's case file. The judge opened his laptop, the screen's blue light illuminating his troubled expression. A quick search revealed what he had missed that morning. Articles about Maya Richardson's rise in the culinary world, her 3 James Beard medals, her work establishing cooking programs in underserved communities. Photos showed her teaching children to cook, speaking at food conferences, and receiving awards with the same grace she had shown in his courtroom. One image particularly caught his eye. Maya in her chef's whites, standing beside her grandmother at the opening of her first restaurant. The caption quoted her, My grandmother taught me that true excellence requires both patience and fairness. Whether you're reducing a sauce or resolving a conflict, rushing to judgment only diminishes the final result. William pushed back from his desk, moving to the window. The city lights twinkled below, reminding him of the careful plating of Maya's dishes, each element placed with purpose and consideration. He had dismissed her testimony that morning with barely a glance, served her judgment as carelessly as a fast food meal. Returning to his desk, he began pulling records from the past month's traffic cases. As dawn approached, patterns emerged that turned his stomach more than any rich dinner could. His fines varied widely for similar offenses, his listening time drastically different from one case to the next. The evidence lay before him in black and white, a menu of inconsistencies he could no longer ignore. The morning sun was just beginning to paint the sky when Sarah found him, still in his robe, surrounded by papers and legal pads filled with notes. "William?" she asked softly, concerned by the dark circles under his eyes. "Have you been up all night?" He looked up at his wife, the previous evening's elegant dress replaced by her comfortable robe. "Do you remember," he asked slowly, "what Chef Richardson said about taking time with important things?" Sarah nodded, bringing him a cup of coffee she had prepared, its aroma filling the room like a peace offering. "I've been reviewing my cases," he continued, gesturing to the papers spread across his desk. "For years, I've prided myself on running an efficient courtroom, but efficiency without careful consideration isn't justice. It's just fast food." The judge picked up Maya's case file again, seeing it now with new eyes. The careful diagram she had tried to show him, the patient way she had waited to speak, the dignity with which she had accepted his rushed judgment, all of it testified to a character he had failed to recognize from his elevated bench. "I need to make some changes," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of revelation. Sarah squeezed his shoulder gently, understanding that her anniversary dinner had provided more than just an excellent meal. It had served up a portion of humble pie that her husband badly needed. 1 month later, the morning sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows differently. Or perhaps it was Judge William Blackwood who had changed. His courtroom now opened 15 minutes earlier, allowing more time for each case. The wooden bench beneath him felt less like a throne and more like a reminder of responsibility. "Your Honor," the court clerk approached with the day's first case file. "The changes you've implemented. There's been positive feedback from the community." She placed a small stack of comment cards on his desk, each one noting the difference in the courtroom's atmosphere. The judge nodded, adjusting his reading glasses as he reviewed the morning docket. His new practice of taking detailed notes during each hearing had slowed the proceedings, but the quality of justice had risen like perfectly proofed bread. Another culinary metaphor he'd gained an appreciation for lately. On his desk sat a letter he'd written to Maya Richardson. He'd revised it 12 times, weighing each word as carefully as she measured her ingredients. The envelope contained not only his apology, but also proof of a substantial donation to her culinary education foundation, which provided scholarships to aspiring chefs from underserved communities. The morning's cases proceeded with new attention to detail. When a young woman tried to explain her situation, Judge Blackwood listened fully, asking clarifying questions instead of rushing to judgment. His reputation for efficiency had been replaced by one for fairness, a trade he now understood was long overdue. During the lunch recess, he walked to the garden table, not for a meal but to deliver his letter personally. The restaurant was quiet, prep cooks chopping vegetables with the same precision he now tried to apply to his cases. Maya emerged from the kitchen, her chef's whites pristine, a notepad filled with recipe calculations in her hand. "Judge Blackwood," she greeted him with professional courtesy. "Welcome back." "Chef Richardson," he replied, the title carrying new respect. "I have something for you." He extended the envelope. "Not a request for reservations," he added with a small smile, "though your food was exceptional." Maya accepted the envelope, her composed expression reminiscent of that morning in court. "Would you like to see our kitchen?" she offered. "We're preparing for service, and I believe you might appreciate seeing how we handle the pressure of time without sacrificing attention to detail. The kitchen tour revealed an orchestra of efficiency and care, line cooks calling out times, sous chefs reviewing plates, each element treated with consideration. It reminded him of how his courtroom should be. Each plate that leaves this kitchen has a story, Maya explained, pausing by the pass. Like each case in your courtroom, quick decisions can be correct ones, but only when they're built on a foundation of proper attention. As Judge Blackwood left the restaurant, he noticed the purple petunias blooming near the entrance, the same flowers Maya had tried to tell him about that morning in court. He paused to truly look at them this time, understanding that justice, like cooking, required not just rules and procedures, but heart and patience. Back in his courtroom that afternoon, he kept Maya's notebook in mind as he wrote his own detailed notes for each case. His revised judgments might not earn Michelin stars, but they now carried the weight of proper consideration, each decision seasoned with understanding, each judgment plated with care.